The priest's voice droned through the ceremony like a dirge, each word a nail sealing Irene's fate. She stood before the altar of Saint Alaric, her body rigid beneath the weight of ivory silk and her father's debts. Beside her, Duke Alastair Hawthorne towered, silver-haired, storm-eyed, a man carved from duty itself. "Do you take this woman?" The words blurred together. Irene's pulse hammered against her throat as she stared at the ancient stones beneath her feet. She could feel the guests behind her, their collective breath held in anticipation or pity, she couldn't tell which. "I do." Alastair's voice cut through the church with perfect formality. Steady. Certain. Empty of anything resembling warmth or desire. He might have been signing a business contract, agreeing to terms of trade. Perhaps that's exactly what this was. The priest turned to her. His expectant gaze felt like a judgment. "Do you take this man?" Her voice, when it came, trembled. "I do." Two syllables that surrendered everything she'd been, everything she'd hoped to become. Each word tasted of ash and obligation. Then came the ring. Duke Alastair took her left hand, his gloved fingers impersonal, careful not to actually touch her skin, and slid the ancient gold band onto her finger. The metal was cold, heavy, foreign. It settled against her knuckle like a shackle, the weight of centuries pressing down. This ring had bound other women before her, other girls sacrificed to duty. She felt their ghosts in the gold, felt herself becoming one more name in the long ledger of Hawthorne brides. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The words fell like stones into still water. Silence rippled through St. Alaric. No one cheered. No one wept. The Duke inclined his head toward her, a gesture of acknowledgement, nothing more. She was his now. His Duchess. His obligation fulfilled. They moved to the vestry for the signing. The marriage register lay open on the ancient oak table, cream pages filled with generations of unions. The officiant dipped the quill in ink and handed it to her. Her maiden name stared up at her from the page, Irene Ellington. The last time she would see it written anywhere that mattered. Her hand shook as she signed. The quill scratched against parchment, the sound of her autonomy being erased, one stroke at a time. The ink bled slightly where she hesitated, a small wound on the page. Below her signature, the officiant wrote her new identity in careful script, Her Grace, Irene Ellington, Duchess of Graymere. "I am no longer myself," she thought, watching the ink dry. "I am his possession now. Unwanted. Unloved. A solution to debts I didn't incur." Duke Alastair signed next, his signature bold and practiced. How many documents had he signed in his life? How many ledgers? She was just another entry now, acquired, catalogued, filed away in the vast accounting of his existence. Behind them, she heard the whispers beginning. The guests couldn't help themselves. Poor child. Sacrificed to winter while still in bloom. 20 years old and bound to a man old enough to be her father. Still, the debts are settled. Her family is saved. A fair trade, some would say. But no one asked her if it was fair. No one had asked her anything at all. The Duke offered his arm as they prepared to exit through the church doors. She took it because she had no choice, feeling the expensive fabric of his coat, the solid muscle beneath. He was a stranger to her, this man she would call husband, this legend incarnate with his reputation for cold efficiency and hearts sealed in crypts. The church bells began to toll as they stepped into the autumn sunlight. Each chime reverberated through her chest like a death knell, marking the end of the girl she'd been. Irene Ellington was gone. In her place stood the Duchess of Graymere, a title, a possession, a line item in someone else's ledger. The ancient gold ring grew heavier with each step down the church path. By the time they reached the waiting carriage, it felt like it might drag her hand to the earth, anchor her to this new reality from which there would be no escape. She climbed into the carriage that would carry her to Graymere Hall. To her new prison. To the rest of her life. The door closed with a final, damning click. The carriage lurched forward, and Irene pressed herself against the far corner, as distant from Duke Alastair as the confined space would allow. The leather seats creaked. Outside the window, the familiar streets of her childhood blurred past, each landmark a memory she was leaving behind forever. Across from her, the Duke sat with perfect posture, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding a silver-topped cane. He filled the space with his presence, broad shoulders, formal wedding attire still immaculate, silver hair catching the filtered light. His storm-blue eyes fixed on something beyond the window, unreadable and remote. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Irene's mind raced with terrors she couldn't name. What awaited her at Greymere Hall? What would he expect of her tonight, tomorrow, for all the years to come? The whispered warnings of married friends echoed in her memory, vague and ominous. She twisted the ancient gold ring on her finger, feeling its weight like a pronouncement. The countryside opened up, rolling hills, autumn-touched trees, stone walls marking boundaries she was crossing forever. Each mile carried her further from everything she'd known into a future she couldn't imagine. She stole glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. The age in his face, the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, seemed to emphasize the gulf between them. 27 years. He'd lived an entire life before she was even born. What could such a man want with a girl barely out of childhood? The answer seemed obvious: an heir, a household manager, a decoration for social occasions. Nothing that required knowing her at all. "You need not fear me, Your Grace." His voice, quiet and unexpected, made her jump. She turned to find him watching her now, those storm-blue eyes no longer distant but focused entirely on her face. The words were gentle. Almost kind. She blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. Men like Duke Alastair Hawthorne, legends carved from duty and cold efficiency, didn't speak with gentleness. She'd heard the stories. His heart was a crypt sealed with obligation, his life measured in ledgers rather than love poems. She couldn't form a response. The kindness seemed impossible, a trick or a test. He didn't press. Simply inclined his head in acknowledgement and returned his gaze to the window, giving her the mercy of his inattention. The silence resumed, but it felt different now, less suffocating, though no less confusing. She managed a small nod, more to herself than to him, and tried to believe him. But belief required trust, and trust required more than 4 words spoken in a carriage. The hours passed. The sun descended. And then, as twilight painted the sky in shades of grey and purple, Greymere Hall rose before them. Irene's breath caught. The estate was vast, Gothic grandeur rendered in grey stone that seemed to absorb the fading light. Towering spires reached toward the darkening sky like accusations. The main structure sprawled across the landscape, more fortress than home, its windows reflecting the sunset like watching eyes. Manicured gardens stretched in geometric perfection, paths winding through hedges tall enough to lose oneself in forever. And there, catching the last light, an ornamental lake lay still as glass, reflecting the grey stone back at itself. Greymere. Greymere. The name suddenly made perfect, ominous sense. Servants lined the entrance, dozens of them, standing at rigid attention in matching livery. Their faces were expressionless, trained to reveal nothing. The sheer number intimidated her. How many people lived and worked within those walls? How many eyes would watch her, judge her, find her wanting? The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Duke Alastair descended first, then offered his hand to help her down. She took it because she had no choice, feeling the leather of his glove, the strength beneath. Inside, the entrance hall swallowed them whole. Ceilings soared 3 stories high, making her feel small and insignificant. Ancestral portraits lined the walls, generations of Hawthorns watching with severe, judging eyes. She noticed the women particularly, previous duchesses of Greymere, all rendered in oil with expressions ranging from stern to sorrowful. Not one smiled. "Will my portrait hang here someday?" She wondered. Will I look that unhappy? The marble floors echoed with every footstep, amplifying her presence, announcing her intrusion. The smell of beeswax and old wood filled her nose, centuries of history pressing down, making it hard to breathe. Duke Alastair's voice rang through the hall. Your new mistress, Her Grace, the Duchess of Graymere. The servants bowed in perfect unison. Irene stood frozen, overwhelmed by the ritual of it all. This was her life now, this vast, cold place filled with strangers and expectations she didn't understand. One woman stepped forward, older than the others, with kind eyes that offered the first warmth Irene had felt since entering. Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb, Your Grace. The housekeeper. Welcome to Graymere Hall. Alastair maintained his formal distance throughout, addressing her only as necessary, touching her only when protocol demanded. His manner was dutiful, correct, empty of any warmth beyond those brief words in the carriage. Irene understood then what her future held, polite estrangement. A marriage of arrangement, nothing more. Perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps coldness was better than cruelty. Mrs. Whitcomb led her up a grand staircase, down corridors lined with more portraits, more history, more weight. Finally, they reached her chambers. Ring if you need anything, Your Grace. The door closed. The servant's footsteps faded. Irene stood alone in rooms larger than her entire childhood home, gilded furniture, silk curtains, a bed that could sleep four. Through the window, Graymere's ground stretched into deepening twilight, the ornamental lake now a dark mirror reflecting nothing but shadows. The ancient gold ring on her finger had never felt heavier. This was her prison now. Beautiful, vast, and utterly isolating. The ladies' maids moved around Irene like silent ghosts, their hands efficient and impersonal as they prepared her for the wedding night. They unlaced her wedding gown with practiced ease, peeling away the ivory silk until she stood in nothing but her shift. One maid brushed out her hair, long, methodical strokes that should have been soothing but only wound her tighter. Another laid out the nightgown across the bed. It was beautiful, that nightgown. Expensive silk the color of cream, delicate lace at the throat and wrists, clearly chosen with care. But as they slipped it over her head, it felt like exposure rather than luxury, too thin, too revealing, designed for purposes she didn't want to consider. In the mirror, a stranger stared back. A woman in bride's white, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes too wide and frightened. The Duchess of Graymere. Not Irene anymore. Never Irene again. Memories surfaced unbidden, whispered warnings from married friends, their voices dropping low when they spoke of wedding nights and wifely duties. Her mother's cryptic anxiety the morning of the wedding, trying to explain something she couldn't quite name, settling finally on, a wife must endure. It will be easier after the first time. Endure. The word echoed in Irene's skull. Will that be all, Your Grace? The head maid's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Irene nodded, not trusting her voice. They curtsied and filed out, closing the door behind them with a soft click that sounded like a trap springing shut. She was alone now. Abandoned to her fate. The chamber was lavish, gilded furniture, silk curtains in deep burgundy, paintings of pastoral scenes that mocked her with their serenity. A fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows across the walls. But despite the luxury, despite the warmth, the room felt cold. A gilded cage made beautiful. The four-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood carved with intricate designs, its mattress piled with pillows and fine linens. It stood there like an altar to obligation, waiting. She couldn't look at it without her stomach twisting. Her eyes found the connecting door instead, heavy oak with brass fittings, currently closed. Duke Alastair's chambers lay beyond. She assumed it was locked from his side, that he would open it when he was ready, when he decided to claim what was his by law and custom. She moved to the window, desperate for distraction. Outside, Graymere's ground stretched into darkness, lit only by moonlight. The ornamental lake glimmered like pewter, beautiful and distant and utterly cold. Like everything else in this place. The ancient gold ring caught the candlelight as she gripped the windowsill. Its weight had become almost unbearable, a physical reminder of everything she'd lost, everything she was now obligated to give. She couldn't stand still. Her body wouldn't allow it. She paced the room like a caged animal, silk nightgown whispering against her legs with each step. Her mind raced with competing terrors, violation and rejection, cruelty and indifference. Which would be worse? I am the Duchess of Greymere now, she thought desperately. But I am no longer Irene. That girl died today in St. Alaric's church. What remains is just this. Property. Obligation. What would he expect? What would he demand? Duke Alastair, with his reputation for cold efficiency, his heart sealed like a crypt, his life measured in ledgers and duty rather than feeling. Would he be cruel? Would he care at all? Or would this be just another transaction, another item checked off in his mental accounting? The phrase, polite estrangement, that she'd clung to earlier now seemed laughably optimistic. There would be nothing polite about tonight. She prepared herself to endure. To survive. To preserve whatever small part of herself she could keep hidden away where he couldn't reach. Every sound made her jump. The settling of the house. The crackle of the fire. Her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She kept glancing at that connecting door, waiting for it to open, dreading and expecting in equal measure. Then, a knock. Gentle, almost tentative. Irene froze mid-pace, her breath catching in her throat. Her hands trembled. She tried to speak, to grant permission or deny it, but no sound emerged. The door opened slowly. Duke Alastair stepped through, and Irene's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. He was still fully dressed, not in a dressing gown or nightshirt, but in his formal wedding attire, waistcoat buttoned, cravat still perfectly tied. He looked exactly as he had hours ago in the church, except now his silver hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He stayed near the door, maintaining distance. His storm blue eyes met hers, and to her shock, they were gentle. Not hungry or demanding or cold. Just, gentle. I came to ensure you are comfortable, he said, his voice even and calm. No demands will be made of you. Irene stared, unable to comprehend his words. They didn't make sense. This wasn't how wedding nights proceeded, was it? She'd been warned, prepared, told what to expect. This wasn't it. He continued, as if reading her confusion. This marriage was arranged for convenience and duty. I will not compound your distress with unwanted advances. He paused, holding her gaze. You need not fear me, your grace. Not tonight. Not ever in that way, unless you choose otherwise. Unless you choose. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and incomprehensible. She was his wife. His property by law. Choice had nothing to do with it. Men like Duke Alastair Hawthorne didn't offer choices to their wives. They took what was theirs by right. Yet here he stood, offering her exactly that. Relief crashed through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. But close behind came confusion, then something darker, a creeping doubt. Was she so undesirable? So repulsive that even duty couldn't compel him to touch her? The man of ledgers, the crypt-hearted Duke, was showing mercy. But was it mercy, or was it rejection? Her flaw revealed itself in that moment, her inability to see past her own shallow judgments, to understand that kindness might exist without calculation. I bid you good night, your grace, Alastair said with a slight bow, formal as ever. He withdrew through the connecting door. Irene heard the lock turn, but the sound came from his side of the door, not hers. He'd given her control. She could lock him out, or let him in. The choice was hers. The gesture's significance didn't register. Not yet. She stood frozen in her cream silk nightgown, alone in the gilded cage that remained unbreached. Safe, but from what? From whom? The night stretched before her, vast and sleepless. Slowly, she moved back to the window, sinking into the cushioned seat. The moon had risen higher, casting silver light across Greymere's lake. The reflection reminded her of his hair, that same metallic gleam. Her mind replayed the scene obsessively. His words. His manner. His restraint. The Duke she'd expected, cruel, demanding, taking what was his, hadn't appeared. Instead, there had been Alistair, this man of unexpected gentleness who spoke of choice and comfort. But she was still trapped. Still bound by the ancient gold ring on her finger, still the duchess of a man she didn't know, still confined to Greymere Hall with its cold marble and judging portraits. Just, differently than she'd feared. As dawn broke over Greymere, painting the lake in shades of rose and gold, Irene hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and confusion. Through the connecting door, she heard movement, the sound of Alistair waking, beginning his day. A reminder that he was always there, just beyond that threshold. The door he'd locked from his side. Giving her the power. She didn't understand it. Didn't understand him. But for the first time since the bells of St. Alaric had tolled, a crack appeared in her judgment of the Duke with storm-blue eyes and silver hair who called himself her husband. A very small crack. But a crack nonetheless. The day after the wedding passed in awkward formality, polite nods at breakfast, stilted conversation about the weather, Duke Alistair disappearing into his study while Irene wandered Greymere's endless corridors like a ghost. The estate was beautiful in its Gothic grandeur, but vast enough to lose herself in. She felt no less imprisoned for the gilded bars. At dinner, he was courteous but distant, the man of ledgers discussing estate business with his steward as if she weren't there. When evening came, dread settled over her again, though less intense than the night before. At least now she knew what to expect, his formal distance, his careful restraint, the locked door between them. She'd changed into her nightgown and was braiding her hair when the knock came, earlier than before, catching her off guard. "Enter," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Duke Alistair stepped through the connecting door, and she noticed immediately that something was different. His storm-blue eyes were softer, less shuttered. He carried a small velvet box in his hands, dark blue against his pale fingers. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace." He moved to the small table near the window, placing the box there with deliberate care. "I have something for you. A wedding gift, though belated." His tone carried warmth she hadn't heard before. Irene approached slowly, curiosity warring with confusion. What could the Duke of Greymere possibly give her that she didn't already possess by virtue of being his wife? "Please," he said, gesturing to the box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on midnight velvet, lay an ornate silver key on a delicate chain. Beside it, a note folded in elegant script. The key gleamed in the candlelight, beautiful and mysterious and utterly incomprehensible. She looked up at him, questioning. "It is the key to the connecting door between our chambers," Alistair said quietly. "And to the main doors of Greymere Hall. Both are now yours to control." The words made no sense. She owned nothing, not even herself. How could she control doors? "Read the note," he said gently. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. His handwriting was precise, each letter formed with care. "The choice shall always be yours. This marriage need not be a prison. You may lock your door against me, or leave Greymere Hall entirely if you wish. I will not stop you. Your autonomy is yours to reclaim. The key is your freedom." Irene read it twice, then a third time. The words refused to settle into meaning. "I know you did not choose this union," Alistair continued, his voice low. "You were given to me to settle debts, a transaction, not a romance. I will not force companionship, affection, or any duty beyond what you willingly give." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his features. "If you choose to leave, I will provide for you. A property in Bath, a generous income. You need never see Graymere or me again. Why? The word tore from her throat, raw and disbelieving. Tears blurred her vision. You could command obedience. Society, law, God, all give you that right. Why give me the power to leave? To reject you? His storm-blue eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw past the formal distance to something deeper, something wounded. Because I remember what it is to feel powerless, Your Grace. His voice carried the weight of old pain. And because you deserve the dignity of choice. Every person does. He drew a breath. Love's deepest expression comes not in claiming, but in offering freedom. If you choose to remain, it must be your choice alone. Alastair. The name suddenly resonated. Liberator. Good night, Your Grace. He bowed slightly. The choice, as always, is yours. He left through the connecting door. She heard his footsteps fade, but no lock turned. He'd given her that power too. Irene collapsed into the chair, clutching the silver key. Everything she believed about this man, the crypt-hearted Duke, the cold calculator, shattered like glass. He'd given her what no one else ever had, choice. Real, tangible freedom. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but overwhelming, confusing relief. With shaking hands, she fastened the chain around her neck. The silver key settled against her heart, a counterweight to the ancient gold ring that bound her. One represented obligation. The other, liberation. For the first time since St. Alaric's bells tolled, Irene felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. Irene didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, the silver key warm against her skin where it rested on its chain, feeling its weight with every breath. The note remained on her nightstand, but she'd already committed every word to memory. The choice shall always be yours. Her mind replayed every interaction with Duke Alastair, reinterpreting each moment through this new lens. The silence in the carriage, she'd thought it coldness, indifference. Now she saw it differently, respect for her grief, giving her space to mourn the life she was leaving behind. His words, "You need not fear me," weren't empty platitudes but genuine promises. Even his formal distance, which she'd taken as rejection, revealed itself as protection. He'd been shielding her, not spurning her. Everything she'd believed about him was wrong. Dawn broke over Graymere's grounds, pale light catching on the ornamental lake and turning it silver. Irene rose, exhausted but transformed, and lifted the key from around her neck. In daylight it looked even more real, solid silver, intricately wrought, undeniably genuine. She approached the connecting door with trembling hands. The key slid into the lock smoothly, turned with a satisfying click. It worked. Her chamber door, the same. She could lock herself in, keep the world out. And downstairs, the main doors of Graymere Hall, she could walk through them right now. Walk away from the Duke, the title, this vast Gothic prison. The realization settled over her like a weight and a weightlessness at once. This wasn't symbolic. Duke Alastair had meant every word. She could leave Graymere, take the property in Bath he promised, build a life of complete independence. She was no longer imprisoned by duty without passion. She was free. Irene stood by the window, silver key in hand, watching the ground stretch endlessly before her. Gardens and pathways and the road beyond that would carry her anywhere she wished to go. No one would stop her. Alastair had given his word. So why did she hesitate? Curiosity, perhaps. Or gratitude. Or the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The Duke had freed her when he had no obligation to do so, when law and custom and God himself gave him the right to demand her obedience. What manner of man gave away power so completely? The legend she'd heard, the crypt-hearted Duke of Graymere, cold and calculating, didn't match the reality of the man who'd stood in her chamber last night, vulnerability flickering in his storm-blue eyes. I remember what it is to feel powerless. What wound had taught him that lesson? Her thoughts spiraled inward. Her father had sold her to settle debts. Society had trapped her with expectations of feminine duty. Any other man would have claimed his rights as husband without a second thought. But Duke Alastair, she reminded herself, the name meant liberator, had freed her completely. The irony wasn't lost on her, the one man who could most control her had chosen to give her power instead. She judged him based on age and title and whispered rumors. Too old, too cold, heart sealed in a crypt. She'd been so certain of his character without knowing anything about him at all. Her shallow judgment now revealed itself clearly, and shame burned through her. Perhaps love's deepest expression really did come not in claiming, but in offering freedom. In trusting someone to choose to remain rather than forcing them to stay. Irene made her decision. She would stay at Graymere, at least for now. Not out of duty or obligation, but curiosity. She wanted to understand this man who defied every expectation. Wanted to see past the storm-blue eyes and silver hair to discover who he truly was. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple morning gown, and descended for breakfast. This time, the walk through Graymere's corridors felt different. Same marble floors, same judging portraits, but the meaning had shifted. She was here by choice. The servants noticed. Mrs. Whitcomb offered a small, knowing smile as Irene passed. Perhaps the housekeeper understood more than she let on. Duke Alastair was already at the table, reading correspondence with a cup of tea steaming beside him. He rose when she entered, and Irene caught the slight warming of his storm-blue eyes. "Good morning, Your Grace. I trust you slept well." The same words as yesterday, but now she heard them properly, genuine concern, not empty formality. "Well enough, thank you," she replied carefully. "The accommodations at Graymere are generous." Her hand rose unconsciously to touch the silver key at her throat. His gaze followed the gesture, and something like relief crossed his features. They ate in comfortable silence. Irene observed him with new attention. He was courteous to the servants, treating them as people rather than furniture, thanking them by name. The papers he read weren't ledgers but philosophy, the margins marked with his own notes in precise handwriting. He took his tea without sugar. Ink stained his fingers. The man of ledgers also read philosophy. Also made careful annotations. Also existed as a person beyond his reputation. "The library and grounds are at your disposal," Alastair mentioned as breakfast concluded, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "You are free to go wherever you wish." He paused, holding her gaze. "Within Graymere Hall or beyond its gates. The choice, as always, is yours." Irene touched the silver key again, feeling its solid weight. He'd meant every word. She was truly free. And somehow, that freedom made her want to stay, to understand the liberator who'd given it to her. Irene spent the morning exploring Graymere Hall with new eyes, no longer a prisoner mapping her cage, but a guest discovering a sanctuary. She avoided Alastair's private study and personal chambers out of courtesy, but the rest of the manor opened before her like a book written in architecture and objects. The music room surprised her. A pianoforte stood near tall windows, its keys showing the wear of regular use. Sheet music lay carefully organized on the stand, Mozart, Beethoven, pieces that required skill and dedication. Did he play? The image didn't fit the legend of the cold duke, yet the evidence was undeniable. In the conservatory, exotic plants flourished under glass, orchids, ferns, specimens she couldn't name. Someone tended them with obvious care and knowledge. Each discovery chipped away at her assumptions, revealing layers she hadn't imagined. But it was the library that truly captured her. 3 stories of books rose around a central atrium, leather and gilt spines stretching toward a domed ceiling painted with celestial scenes. Worn chairs sat in reading nooks. The smell of old paper and ink and beeswax candles filled the air, the scent of knowledge preserved and loved. Irene browsed the shelves, expecting legal texts and ledgers from the Duke of Graymere. Instead she found philosophy, Kant, Locke, Rousseau. Poetry, Wordsworth, Keats, Byron. Natural science, travel journals, volumes on astronomy and botany. These were books chosen for pleasure and enlightenment, not business. One volume caught her eye, Wordsworth's collected poems, spine cracked from frequent reading. She pulled it down and it fell open naturally, revealing pressed flowers between the pages, violet, primrose, wild rose, each perfectly preserved. Beside one verse, a note in elegant handwriting, witnessed this very scene at Windermere, 1820. Another, solitude is both burden and blessing. And beside a passage about reflection, Graymere reflects grey sky, kinship in color and isolation. He'd written about Graymere itself, finding connection between the estate's name and his own state of being. The man of ledgers was also a man of pressed flowers and poetry. In the corner, a brass telescope pointed toward the window. Constellation charts scattered across the desk beside it. Irene picked up a leather journal, astronomical observations in Alastair's precise hand, entries dated deep into the night. One passage made her breath catch. In the vastness of the heavens, I find a kinship in solitude. The stars do not judge, nor do they require explanations. They simply exist, distant and beautiful, as do I. From Graymere's windows, the night sky is my only companion who asks nothing of me. She sank into his reading chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't coldness, it was loneliness. Not a crypt-sealed heart, but one wounded and seeking refuge in nature and stars. He'd chosen solitude not from arrogance but protection. They shared something profound, isolation. Hers forced by circumstance, his chosen as armor. Even the estate's name reflected it, grey waters mirroring grey skies, beauty in melancholy reflection. She wanted to know more. Not from duty or obligation, but genuine interest in this complicated soul who hid behind storm-blue eyes and silver hair. The man who'd given her freedom deserved understanding in return. At breakfast the next morning, Duke Alastair glanced up from his correspondence, and Irene noticed something different in his expression, a hesitancy that made him seem almost uncertain. "I take tea in the garden each afternoon, weather permitting," he said, his tone carefully casual. "You're welcome to join me, should you wish. No pressure, no expectation. Just an invitation that she could accept or decline as freely as everything else he'd offered her." "I would like that," Irene heard herself say. A smile crossed his face, brief but genuine, the first she'd seen. It transformed him entirely, softening the lines around his eyes, making his silver hair seem distinguished rather than merely aged. She found herself smiling back. That afternoon, she followed a stone path through Graymere's gardens to find him waiting near a rose arbor. The garden was beautiful, manicured paths giving way to wilder sections where nature was allowed its freedom, and beyond it all, the ornamental lake reflecting the grey sky like a mirror. Alastair rose when she arrived, seating her with careful courtesy. The tea service was elegant but unpretentious, fine china, small cakes, sandwiches cut precisely. The ceremony of it felt peaceful rather than formal. They began cautiously, speaking of safe things, the unseasonably warm weather, the garden's design, Graymere's history. But when he mentioned designing the wild garden himself, adding, "Order has its place, but nature requires some freedom," Irene heard the parallel. He valued freedom in all things, even in how flowers grew. He asked about her interests. Actually asked, then listened as she spoke about books and music, about whether she found Graymere comfortable. He didn't interrupt or dismiss her thoughts. He simply listened, as if her opinions mattered. Tea became their daily ritual. Over the following week, their conversations deepened, books they'd read, observations about the birds that visited the garden, debates about philosophy that surprised her with their gentleness. The man of ledgers was also a man of ideas who welcomed disagreement without taking offense. Irene found herself relaxing, smiling more easily. The ancient gold ring on her finger felt less like a shackle and more like something she couldn't yet define. One afternoon, comfortable silence settled between them. They sat watching sparrows chase each other through the roses, drinking tea, needing no words. Graymere's lake glimmered in the distance, silver-grey like Alastair's hair. This was different from loneliness, Irene realized. Solitude shared with someone who understood its value transformed it into something else, companionship without demands, presence without pressure. You are not what I expected, she ventured, surprising herself with her boldness. Alistair paused, teacup halfway to his lips. His storm-blue eyes met hers, vulnerable, curious. Oh. What did you expect? Someone cruel, Irene admitted. Demanding. Someone who would see me as a possession, a line in the ledgers. Her hand rose to touch the silver key at her throat. Someone who would claim rights rather than offer freedom. And instead, his voice was soft. Instead I find someone who reads Wordsworth and keeps his mother's pressed flowers in the pages. She held his gaze. Someone who observes stars from Greymere's windows and finds kinship in solitude. Someone who gave me freedom when he could have claimed ownership. Her voice dropped. I judged you wrongly. Based on age, title, whispers. The Legend of the Duke of Greymere. Alistair set down his cup carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried raw honesty. I expected to gain a duchess, a figurehead for social obligation, a solution to your family's crisis. He paused. Instead, I find myself in the company of a woman, a person with thoughts and dreams that were sacrificed for others' deaths. Sadness crossed his features. I could not, in good conscience, compound that injustice with my own selfishness. You lost your choice once. I would not take it again. Irene felt something shift in her chest. Most men would not see it as injustice. Then I am grateful not to be most men. The moment stretched between them, profound and fragile. The age gap that had seemed like a chasm now felt irrelevant compared to this understanding. May I ask something? Irene said hesitantly. In private, might I call you by your name? Your grace feels like a barrier now. His surprise was evident, followed by unmistakable pleasure. I would like that very much. Alistair. My mother called me Al. And may I be simply Irene, when we're alone? Please. The afternoon light caught his silver hair as they looked at each other, and Irene realized it was beautiful, moonlight over Greymere's lake, not winter's grey. She was seeing him now, truly seeing Alistair rather than the legend. And he was seeing her, not as obligation, but as someone worth knowing. The library is as much yours as mine now, Irene, he said as tea concluded. And if you'd like, I could show you the telescope this evening. The stars are particularly clear tonight. An invitation to his sanctuary, his inner world. Irene touched the silver key at her throat and realized, she didn't want to leave Greymere. The freedom he'd given her included the freedom to choose to stay. Irene was walking Greymere's grounds, enjoying the crisp afternoon air and her newfound freedom, when she heard it, a mare's distressed whinnying, sharp with pain and fear. She followed the sound to the stables, drawn by concern and curiosity. Inside, she found Alistair kneeling in the straw despite his fine morning coat, silver hair catching the light filtering through the stable doors. A chestnut mare lay on her side, legs swollen and clearly injured, her eyes rolling white with panic. The leg caught in a gap between the boards. Your Grace, the stable master was saying, his tone grimly practical. Maybe kinder to put her down. The expense of treatment. Send for the best veterinarian from London. Alistair's voice was firm but not angry, his hands moving gently over the mare's injured leg. Spare no expense. We'll give her every chance. But Your Grace, she's just a mare. She is a living being who depends on our care. Alistair looked up, and Irene saw genuine anguish in his storm-blue eyes. We gave her captivity in these stables, we owe her compassion in return. Every chance. She deserves that dignity. Irene watched from the stable door, transfixed. He spoke softly to the frightened animal, easy, girl, easy now. I won't let you suffer, and the mare calmed under his touch, her breathing steadying. This was Duke Alistair Hawthorne, Legend of Greymere, kneeling in straw and mud for a suffering creature, his careful tenderness revealing more about his character than any reputation could convey. He stayed with the mare until the veterinarian arrived from London hours later. The verdict: the leg could be saved with proper care and time. Alistair personally supervised moving her to a recovery stall, ensuring she had soft bedding, fresh water, everything she needed for comfort. Only then did he notice Irene watching. Embarrassment flickered across his face, straw in his silver hair, mud on his fine coat, ink-stained hands now dirty from stable work. "I apologize," he said. "You witnessed me in a rather undignified state." "No," Irene replied softly. "I witnessed kindness. There's no indignity in that." His eyes met hers, gratitude and something deeper. She was frightened. Powerless. "I could ease that, so I did." They walked back to Greymere Hall together. "You care deeply for all living things," Irene observed. "All creatures deserve compassion, Irene. Especially those dependent on our care, who cannot choose their circumstances." He paused, then added quietly, "Powerlessness is a terrible thing. I ease it where I can." The words hung between them. He understood her cage because he'd known his own. That evening, returning a book to the library, Irene accidentally knocked over a leather portfolio on his desk. Sketches spilled across the floor. She gasped, gathering them quickly, then stopped. They were drawings. Alastair's drawings. Landscapes of Greymere through different seasons, rendered with love and meticulous attention. The lake at dawn, the gardens in snow, the Gothic spires against storm clouds. Nature studies, birds mid-flight, flowers in extraordinary detail, trees captured in various lights. All beautiful, all revealing a man who truly saw the world's beauty. But the portrait struck her most deeply. Servants depicted with dignity and individual character, Mrs. Whitcomb laughing, the stable boy with his gap-toothed grin, the groundskeeper's weathered hands tending roses. Each person rendered with humanity, not as servants or subjects, but as individuals worthy of artistic immortalization. And there, the mare. Drawn before her injury, captured in motion, powerful and free. He'd noticed her, valued her, long before she needed saving. These weren't the works of a cold aristocrat. They were the works of someone who felt deeply, who saw people, really saw them, and captured their essential humanity. "I see you found my sketches." Irene turned. Alastair stood in the doorway, vulnerability written across his features. These were clearly deeply private. "I'm so sorry, I accidentally," she stopped, meeting his eyes. "Al, these are beautiful. Truly beautiful." He moved into the room, uncomfortable but softening at her genuine appreciation. "A hobby, nothing more. I find it calming. A way to preserve moments." She held up Mrs. Whitcomb's portrait. "This is more than a hobby. You see people. Really see them. Not as servants or subjects, but as humans with dignity and individual beauty." His defenses lowered. "Perhaps I spend too much time observing rather than participating in life. Safer to watch from distance, to capture in sketches, than to engage fully." Irene moved closer. "Or perhaps you feel more deeply than others, and solitude is your protection. The world can be cruel to those with sensitive hearts." Alastair met her eyes, startled by her insight. "You understand." Not a question. A statement of profound relief. Someone finally understood the wounded man behind Greymere's legend. Someone saw why the liberator had freed himself through solitude, because the world had punished him for feeling too much. Alastair carefully gathered his sketches, but left one deliberately, the garden where they took tea, Greymere's lake glimmering in the background. He placed it on the table, a gift, an opening, a piece of himself shared. Irene touched the silver key at her throat and realized, she didn't just want to stay at Greymere. She wanted to know all of him, the wounded soul, the sensitive artist, the man who'd freed her because his own heart had once been trapped. Weeks had passed since the storm, and afternoon tea in the garden had become their sacred ritual. Irene sat close to Alastair on the stone bench, their hands intertwined naturally, watching sunlight dance across Greymere's lake. The water lay peaceful now, reflecting blue sky instead of grey isolation. He sketched with his free hand, capturing her profile as she read Wordsworth aloud, the same worn volume with his mother's pressed flowers visible between the pages. They'd just finished debating a verse about solitude's dual nature, their discussion animated and equal, two minds meeting without hierarchy or pretense. "You've made that argument before," she teased, glancing at his sketch. And you've countered it just as eloquently each time. His storm-blue eyes held warmth she'd never imagined that first day at St. Alaric. I suspect we'll debate it for years to come. Years, she repeated softly, the word holding promise rather than dread. Greymere Hall itself felt transformed. The connecting door between their chambers stayed open now, not from obligation but choice. They'd chosen closeness over solitude, companionship over isolation. The manor's cold marble seemed warmer somehow, its vast corridors more lived in, its Gothic grandeur softened by love. The staff noticed. Mrs. Whitcomb had remarked just yesterday, beaming with approval, Greymere needed this. They both did. The Duke smiled now. The Duchess laughed. The house itself seemed to breathe easier. Later that evening, Irene passed through the library where the silver key rested on the mantel, placed there the night of the storm and never moved. She paused to touch it, remembering. The wedding night gift that had changed everything. The symbol of freedom that had paradoxically bound them together through choice rather than obligation. The ancient gold ring on her finger caught the candlelight. Once it had felt like a shackle. Now it represented something different, not imprisonment, but a promise freely renewed each day. Looking at old memories. Alistair appeared beside her, carrying his telescope journal. The stars are clear tonight, she said, reading his intention. They climbed to the library's upper windows where his brass telescope waited. This had been his solitary sanctuary, watching stars in isolation, finding kinship with distant, silent beauty. Now he shared it willingly, teaching her constellations, listening to her observations, their voices mingling in the darkness. His latest sketches lay nearby, she'd seen them earlier. Herself watching stars, reading in the library, walking Greymere's grounds. He'd begun drawing her into his world, literally and figuratively. The kinship in solitude had become kinship in chosen companionship. The mare is fully healed, Alistair mentioned as they gazed at the emerging stars. Walking without any trace of injury. Because you gave her every chance. Irene squeezed his hand. Because you understand what it means to be powerless and choose compassion anyway. They'd built something rare, a marriage of true partnership. Born from captivity, matured through liberation, bloomed into love. Not despite the circumstances of their meeting, but because those circumstances had forced honesty neither might have chosen otherwise. Do you regret it? Alistair asked quietly, his eyes on Greymere's lake below, now reflecting the first evening stars. That you stayed? Irene smiled, touching both the ring on her finger and glancing toward the library where the silver key waited on its mantel. Every day I choose to stay at Greymere. That's rather the point, isn't it? She turned to face him fully. The gift you gave me wasn't just freedom to leave. It was freedom to choose you. He pulled her close, silver hair catching the fading light like moonlight on water. Then I am the most fortunate of men. We both are, she corrected gently, reaching up to touch his face. We're both free. And we both choose this. Every day. Alistair the Liberator, she whispered against his lips. You freed us both. They kissed as the sun set over Greymere, two people who'd found freedom in each other, not freedom from, but freedom to. Freedom to choose, to stay, to love without coercion or obligation. Inside the library, the silver key glinted on the mantel in candlelight. On Irene's finger, the ancient gold ring gleamed. One represented the binding that had brought them to Greymere together, duty, debt, obligation. One represented the freedom that had let them choose to stay, autonomy, dignity, respect. Together, they represented the truth they discovered. Real love exists only in the space where choice is possible. And they chose each other. Every single day. At Greymere, the Greymere no longer reflected only isolation and melancholy. It reflected two souls who'd found each other through the gift of freedom, a liberator who'd freed himself by freeing another, and a woman who discovered that the deepest expression of love comes not in being claimed, but in choosing to remain. The stars emerged fully overhead, distant and beautiful, no longer Alistair's only companions. He had Irene now. And she had him. By choice. Always by choice.